Good morning, fourth grade. For the past week, we have been exploring different environments and the different factors that make up the environment. We have looked at the non-living factors like the temperature and the type of soil that exists in the environment. And we also looked at the living things like the plants and animals that make up the environment. The temperature and the soil, even though they are non-living, they are very helpful to the living things like plants and animals, because depending on the temperature that the environment has, it will help determine what animals can survive and what plants can survive in the environment. The same for soil. Depending if the soil is fertile or not fertile, it depends what kind of plant will be able to grow. Temperature, soil, plants, and animals all work together to create an environment. We explored 6 different environments: rainforest, desert, grassland, taiga, forest, and tundra. Each of these 6 different environments have different factors. There's either temperature, soil, plants, or animals that distinguish it from each of the different environments. Today, we're going to continue exploring living things. Before we continue, let's watch this video that tells us all about living things.
Squeaks, it's a great day to be alive. And yes, I'm really living, and so are you. But what does that mean? It sounds like a pretty simple question, right? There are living things all around us, as well as things that are not living. When I was looking around the fort's playground just a minute ago, I saw a rock, which is not a living thing. But the bird that was singing in the tree, that's definitely living. And the tree is too. But sometimes the answer to the question of what's a living thing and what's not can be a little tricky. I can hear a bird sing when I watch a video on a computer or a phone. But of course, computers and phones aren't living things, even though they might make sounds exactly like things that are alive. Scientists called biologists study all sorts of living things. So they're the experts on what things are living and what things are not. After studying all kinds of life, they discovered that everything that's alive, or was once alive, has a few things in common. You can think of them kind of as rules that all living things follow. So let's take a look at some of these rules. Rule number 1. Living things need energy. You need energy to play and to do your schoolwork. A plant needs energy to make new leaves and to grow. Even some kinds of germs use energy when they make us sick. Living things get energy in lots of different ways, but they all need it to stay alive. Okay, rule number 2. Living things grow and change. You're bigger than you were when you were a baby, but you're not as big as you will be someday. And just like you, all living things grow and change, whether that means growing up or getting more branches and making new leaves like trees do. All right, rule number 3. Living things reproduce. Reproduce means to make more of something. When living things reproduce, they make more of themselves. For animals, that means having babies like kittens and puppies that will grow up to become adult cats and dogs. For plants, that usually means making seeds that can grow into new plants. Rule number 4, living things respond to the world around them. In other words, when something around a living thing changes, that living thing changes too. For example, when you get cold, you might shiver or put on a coat. Both of these things will help you warm up. So that's how you respond to the cold. And in the same way, in autumn, when the days start to get shorter and the weather starts to get cooler, some trees lose their leaves. They are responding to the change of seasons. Great question, Squeaks. What about the leaves that have fallen to the ground? Are they living or non-living? Those leaves on the ground, even the brown dead ones, were part of a living thing, the tree. So biologists say that we still call them living things. Now, it might seem like there's some things missing from the rules, like what about moving? When you think about it, a lot of living things move, but not all of them do. Plants, for example, don't get up and walk around, but they're still alive. And there are things that move that were never alive, like shadows or the hands on a watch. Shadows don't use energy, and watches don't reproduce or grow. So if you're thinking like a biologist, then something has to meet all of the rules in order for it to be considered a living thing. If it doesn't, then it's not alive. Now, are you ready to test what you know about living things? It's game time! I'll name a thing, and you have to decide whether it's alive or not. First up, is an earthworm living or non-living? If you said living, you're right. Earthworms need energy to wriggle through the soil. They also grow, and they lay eggs that hatch into baby earthworms, which means they reproduce. And if you've ever held an earthworm, you know they respond to changes in the world around them. If you pick one up, it tries to wiggle away. All right, next up, is a cloud living or non-living? If you said non-living, you're right. A cloud may look like it grows because it might get bigger, say before it rains, but a cloud doesn't use energy and it doesn't have baby clouds, so it doesn't reproduce. And since it doesn't follow all the rules, it's not living. Okay, what about this stick? Is it living or not living? If you said living, you're right. This stick is living because it was once part of a tree. And since the tree is a living thing, then the stick can also be called a living thing. So you can use these easy rules to study everything you see around you. Go for a walk outside and take some time to stop and think about what you see. Icicles, acorns, pebbles, and grass, and look at the clues we talked about. Are they alive or not? Thanks for joining us on SciShow Kids.
In that video, we were able to see what is a living thing and what is a not living thing. Living things need to be able to grow, change, move, and reproduce. We were able to see that living things are objects or organisms like plants and animals. Now that we have explored what is a living thing, I want you to make a prediction. What do you think living things need to survive? Share your thinking on Edpuzzle now. Now we are going to move on to our investigation. We are going to complete an investigation focusing on plants and finding out what this living thing of a plant needs to survive. We will be focusing on a plant, but remember, living things include also animals.
I never paid much attention to plants. I mean, they just sit there. They're so still. It's so easy to forget about them. But there are some really interesting plants. Many of them you can even buy and have in your home or your yard. Like maybe you've seen these. They're cactuses. There's some really cool cactuses out there. There are also some really colorful plants, like these. This kind is called a bromeliad. They're from the jungle. They do really well inside of people's houses. Now, where I live, I have one that's reddish-orange like this, growing in my house. Here's the bromeliad's cousin. Now, this is maybe my top favorite plant that I own. Do you recognize it? That's a pineapple right there. This is a pineapple plant. It's where pineapples come from. I found this at a plant store for $10. I couldn't believe it. Oh, but actually, let me show you one of my other favorite plants I have. It's this little tree. Trees are plants too. They're just a special kind of plant, a plant that has wood and grows tall. Now, speaking of tall, this one, it's just a baby tree, but it's not just any tree. It's a baby redwood tree from California. When redwood trees grow up, they're the tallest trees in the world. I just love having a little baby one, knowing that one day it's going to get so tall. I'll have to plant it in a forest once it gets bigger so that it has room to grow. You can find interesting plants all around you. Plants growing outside, plants in the forest, plants in the garden, plants that people keep inside. There are so many different kinds of plants that you can grow at home. Once you become a plant keeper, here's something to think about though. If you're going to leave for a trip and you're gone for a few weeks, you'll need someone to take care of your plants. You'll need a babysitter for your plants. You'll need a plant sitter. Now that's a strange word you don't hear every day. A plant sitter? Why would you need someone to take care of your plants if you're going to be gone?
Let's watch this sped up video to see what happens when a plant doesn't get enough water. Notice how after a couple of days without no water, the leaves began to flop and fall to the side.
Plants, things like trees and flowers and grass, anything that has leaves, they're all living things. Now, I know plants don't look like you or me, and they don't look like animals. They're not animals, but they are alive. And so they need to drink water, just like you, me, and animals do. Now, plants don't have mouths, but you might know that they soak up the water in their roots, like when it rains. So, if you're a plant keeper and you're gone for more than a few days, the reason you need a plant sitter is for them to come and water your plants. Otherwise, the plants will go thirsty and they'll die. Is there anything else a plant needs besides just water? Well, I want to tell you a story about a tree. There was this big old tree growing in a field of grass. Like any tree, it cast a big shadow on the ground. On a bright sunny day, if you sat near the base of the tree, it would look dark where you were sitting. The tree blocked the sunlight above. Now, one day, a powerful storm passed by. The wind was gusting. The branches on the tree were swaying back and forth very wildly. As the wind blew stronger and stronger, the old tree got knocked over. Now, it looked like this. It's sad that such a huge tree got knocked over. But something new happened. Next to the big tree, a little tree had been growing. Year after year, it never got very big. But once the big tree got knocked over, suddenly in just a few months, that little tree grew bigger and bigger and bigger than it had ever grown before. Within just a few years, it got so big that it started to take the place of the old tree that had fallen over. Everywhere we look in forests, we can find baby versions of big trees. When the big trees get old, fall over, or get knocked over in a storm, the little trees around them start to grow big. Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think that little trees start to grow when the big trees get old and fall over?
Here's what we noticed when the big tree fell over. In the first picture, we noticed that the little tree is sitting in the shadow of the big tree. So it's not getting much sunlight, it's sitting in the dark. However, in the second picture, when the tree is knocked over, the little tree is it's no longer sitting in the shadow. So it's being exposed to the light. The sunlight is very helpful for a tree to grow. During the next week, we will start an experiment so we can explore why the sunlight is helpful for trees and other living things to grow. Please share your thinking on Edpuzzle on why you think sunlight is important.